All right. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. This is DFS Army's tournament strategy show where we look at last night's slate. Then we'll look at today's gigantic 11 gamer. And, we'll talk about some guys that are standing out, some guys that we like, some guys that I'm not as excited about. The most important thing is we have a crap ton of questionable guys, so we can talk through some possible pivots and options that we'll work with there. So, yeah, it'll be an interesting one. So let's look at last night. Last night was not awful, but definitely missed out because of one key piece. We hit on a pretty big play of on the pre-lock show. We completely faded Bam Adebayo. I unchecked him, wasn't going there. And that panned out. It definitely helped my lines kind of have like a natural, solid foundation, but not a lot of upside, mostly because I did not have a lot of Jimmy Butler. I knew I was worried about not having a ton of the heat. You only needed one, and it was your guy, Jimmy. I had some, of course, but definitely needed more to have any chance of taking down a contest yesterday. And I feel like we had a pretty decent shot, to be honest. SGA was close to a core play. We talked about him on the pre-lock show. Brandon, we got lucky. Well, we got lucky on Brandon. He saw a little bit of extra run in the blowout, but he was able to get there for us. We were over the field on him. We already talked about Jimmy. Definitely a little bit of a bummer. Sarge was a core play. That made sense. Claxton, we were over the field on Claxton, so that was nice. That definitely helped lines a good bit. Chris Paul was a core play. Kuminga was a core play once we found out he was starting. So I did force him into my lineups. And then Isaiah Joe, we talked about him on the pre-lock show. I wasn't overly excited about him, to be honest. But he was good last night. He was good. We had some exposure to Isaiah Joe, but not enough for me, again, to have the kind of upside I wanted with my lines. So interesting slate last night. Is Clay washed? It sure looked that way. He destroyed a lot of my lines. He was probably my biggest mistake last night. But all in all, it was just an okay one. Let's move forward. Look at today's slate and go from there. Dixon, you're already starting with it, man. No pool party. I think I'm with you. I think I'm finally on board. I'm kind of tired, and I don't love the matchup, so I don't feel like I kind of have to get there. But let's look at this Knicks against the Washington Wizards game. From an injury news standpoint, Washington, the Knicks, RJ Barrett is questionable, of course, and Quentin Grimes is questionable. Both of those matter. We saw Randall have a strong performance last time Barrett was out, and he sees a fantastic matchup against the Washington Wizards, who I like playing bigs against. So if Barrett's out, I'm comfortable going right back to Randall. And Brunson would be interesting. I think he's viable on this slate, even if Barrett plays. Soft matchup against the Wizards, just across the board. Game total is pretty high, so not overly concerned about that. So I think Brunson's viable, but not my favorite guard on the slate by any means. He becomes much more viable if RJ Barrett is out tonight. So per usual, keep an eye on the news. If Quentin Grimes and Barrett is out, I think we're going to have to play a little bit of Josh Hart here. It just makes too much sense. And even guys like Quickly would be a little bit more viable, but wouldn't be as excited about him. I think Hart will be the main guy I would focus on, assuming he would be the one to start here. But we'll see. That's the first game on the slate. It's early. We'll get that news in time, so I'm not overly concerned here. For the Wizards, this has been a team that's been pretty frustrating this season. Wright is out, so that's a situation that doesn't move the needle too much for me. So for where I'm at right now, I'm not looking to force exposure to any of these guys, to be honest. I think Gafford would be the most interesting at 5,400, but I don't like picking on the Knicks too often. If there was another guy outside of Gafford, it will probably be Poole. But again, I'm not trying to get here much tonight. Everyone's healthy, and we have a lot of teams that are in much better spots, assuming news breaks the right way. Philip, appreciate you, man. Agreed. Let's get some money. Let's make it happen on a Friday. Also, I'm so glad it's Friday. It's been a long week, guys. I'm ready for a little bit of a break, but we'll see where we land. So for the Bucks, we have Giannis listed as questionable. Huge. We saw what Damian Lillard did last time with Giannis out. I would be more than willing to go right back to Lillard tonight against the Charlotte Hornets. Beauchamp is listed as questionable as well. Doesn't matter for me as much, but it definitely would open up things a little bit more for some of the peripheral players and guys on this team. But I still think there would be better spots if he ends up being out. I really care about the Giannis news more than anything. If Giannis plays tonight, I'm willing to play him. I do think they are playing tomorrow. So this is the front end of a back-to-back for the Bucks. So it wouldn't shock me if they decide to keep it easy on Giannis and he doesn't play tonight. But again, this is another early game that we'll get the news too early. So I'm not overly gonna hyper focus on the different scenarios here. But I do like Giannis if he plays. I like Lillard if Giannis doesn't play. And Brook Lopez, of course, is going to be on my radar tonight either way. We like to play bigs against the Hornets. That has worked very well for us historically, and I'm going to keep going right back to it. So I need to put a like on him to make sure I don't forget about him. He's going to be very easy to forget about on this slate. And, of course, Bobby Portis would be close to a core play, too, if Giannis ends up being out. Already an interesting slate, guys. We're seeing things moving and grooving, so hopefully y'all are keeping up. Thomas Dye, good to see you, man. Hope you're doing well. Next up, we have the Charlotte Hornets. Long list here, but we'll keep it short. Gordon Hayward is questionable. Brandon Miller is questionable. I saw the notification come through that Hayward's going to be a game time decision. And then Terry Rozier has been out for a while. For me, there's quite a few interesting things to dig into here. Miles Bridges is playing again for the first time since being out and suspended. He has been practicing with the team, though, and I expect him to be a part of the rotation here. I would mention that I would plan on being significantly over the field to Bridges today, especially if Hayward and or Miller end up missing this game. I would expect Bridges to move into the starting lineup and see probably close to 30-plus minutes in at 5,300. It would be really hard for me not to get there, and I would love him even more if he continues to be low-owned in that situation. Obviously, crappy guy did some really bad things, but from a DFS-only standpoint, I would have to pull the trigger there. We know he can be explosive, and he isn't coming off an injury or anything. He's really just coming out from being suspended and not playing for doing really bad things. Game Addict, where's Beat-Up? I know. I miss having Beat-Up. He will be on the pre-lock show. He's been on the pre-lock show most of this week. Just with work and stuff, it's usually easier for him to get to the pre-lock show than it is for him to get to this side of things. You're right, Tanner. Allegedly. Don't know for sure. Allegedly. Don't want to get sued. But I do like him from a DFS standpoint tonight, especially if Hayward and Miller end up being ruled out. For the Boston Celtics against the Toronto Raptors, this is another game that's really going to depend on the injury news. Porzingis is still listed as questionable. Brown is listed as questionable. Horford is listed as probable. For me, in this kind of situation and scenario, I obviously would like Tatum if both Brown and Porzingis are out. Jrue Holiday would be another guy I want to make sure I have exposure to in these situations. Derek White is viable as well. Outside of that, of course, we saw Hauser move into the starting lineup as well last time around. Fine getting exposure to him, but only if Brown and Porzingis are out. Pritchard did all right too, but not overly excited. I think we'll have better value plays than these guys, but I really want to focus on Tatum if Brown is out, and I like Tatum even more if Porzingis and Brown are out. So pretty much how I'm thinking about it. Tatum, Jrue would become priorities for me. Outside of that, I would hope to just kind of get some natural exposure to a few of these guys, but I wouldn't prioritize them by any means. I hope so, Chris. It does seem to look that way. So feeling pretty good about them playing. And for me, if they do play, I'm not playing the Celtics tonight. That simple for me. We have 11 games on the slate. If this team is healthy, not worth it. Of course, you can always take a GPP shot on Tatum or Brown, but the other guys, I don't think it's worth it. Jrue is such a low usage guy when they're all healthy. It's tough, real tough. For the Raptors, we have OG listed as doubtful. Gary Trent Jr. looks like he'll be returning. He's listed as probable. I would say the biggest thing for me here is that none of these guys are standing out. I don't think I like any of these guys, which is a little weird. I usually like having a little bit of exposure to the Raptors. We did see Jakob Poeltl have a strong game last time out, but I don't love this matchup against the Celtics. And in theory, the matchup would be a little bit easier if Porzingis is out, but they have Horford there. I'm not overly concerned about a soft matchup for him either way. A team that I do like a bit more, of course, is the 76ers. And once again, we have more injury news on deck. For the Sixers, Joel Embiid is listed as questionable. We know how big that is for this team. If he misses this game, I'm playing Maxey. I'm going right back here. I think we can pick on this Atlanta Hawks front court. And I think that Maxey is more than capable of excelling in this kind of matchup. 9,100 price tag. If Embiid plays, I'm not as excited by, but as long as he stays low owned, he's going to be on my radar as a leverage play. We've seen the upside at this point. I don't need to, it can't be proven to me anymore. We know what's there. So I like Maxey tonight. Either way, I'll probably be at least around field weight, but he's on my radar as a potential leverage play tonight. Tobias Harris is popping at 20% projected ownership right now. The sim model likes him too. There's a lot of things pointing towards Harris today. I personally only want to get there if Embiid is out. If I have some exposure to him naturally, that's fine. But if Embiid's healthy today, I don't really foresee myself being significantly over the field to Harris. I just never love his role on this team when everyone's healthy. Every now and then he can have strong performances, but I don't love it. I hear you, Chris. You know, for me, I had my first 100K win by playing Joel Embiid when he had a questionable tag and everyone was scared to play him. So a little bit biased there. I agree with you that when he's questionable, I kind of like him a little bit more because everyone kind of gets scared off. And this is a solid matchup against the Hawks. We know that their front court isn't the strongest defensively, so I like this spot for him. For the Atlanta Hawks, you know, they're looking pretty healthy these days. No one's really standing out for me here. Obviously, Trae Young can be like your GPP target, but I feel like he's more of a dart throw at this point. He really just has to be hot and his shots be falling. And I don't love the matchup against the Sixers, so he's not my favorite play. You know, we were able to make some decent money this season playing Murray while he was too cheap, but I don't think he's priced appropriately for the matchup and for his role when Trae Young is healthy. So don't love it. Guys like Jalen Johnson and Capella and Okongwu, it's fine if they're in the mix, but they're not priorities for me tonight. I'm comfortable just getting some exposure. Okongwu's looking like he's going to be relatively popular on this slate. I think that could change potentially, especially once we get that Pistons news. Wouldn't shock me if his ownership falls a little bit. But we've seen it enough times where Okongwu can just fit into that 100K winning lineup because he's cheap and he plays pretty consistent minutes. Next up, we have the Kings against the Spurs. You know, we said it on the pre-lock show, or no, we said it on this show yesterday with Brandon. Sabonis isn't going to be below 10K anymore. I don't foresee us getting lucky and having a slate where he's going to be below that number. And he's proven he can pay it off. He had a very strong game against the Lakers, and he sees a decent matchup again today against the Spurs. My biggest issue here is I like other bigs more on this slate, and if I'm paying up, I want to pay up to Jokic. If I have lineups where he shows up a bit naturally, that's fine, but I like Jokic a bit more on this slate, which I don't think anyone would say is too crazy. Fox and crew, again, the team has one of the highest totals on the slate. Oh, crap. I forgot to talk about one of my favorite plays, LaMelo Ball. I have a like on him. For the Hornets, LaMelo Ball is going to be a leverage play. I want to be significantly over the field to him. We can play guards against the Bucks. We know that at this point. I'm going to keep doing that. My thought, I was saying that though, De'Aaron Fox falls in a similar category for me. high game totals, I like playing some of these low-owned guards where they can just get those points efficiently. And even if the game does end up being a blowout, he usually does enough early on to still exceed value. So I like Fox tonight. I like Ball tonight. Those are two guys I want to make sure I have exposure to. Outside of that, Monk has been very efficient with the time he's had recently, but ideally we get better value and I don't have to play a ton of him. Same story with Herder. If I get some, that's fine. I don't really want to be above field weight, though, which is for them around 12, 17%. So ideally not above 20-ish. The Spurs are tough. I always want to play some of these Spurs before I start digging into the slate, and then I realize it doesn't really make a ton of sense to. Victor obviously has upside, but I don't believe this is the matchup for him, so I'm not really excited about that play. Keldon Johnson has been a bit more involved from an offensive standpoint, but not excited about it. Malachi Branham is standing out as kind of like the chalk guard on the slate. It's a decent spot. He's been seeing pretty consistent minutes. Let's see. And he's starting, or he should be starting once again with Vassell out. So it makes a lot of sense. He's a bit too cheap for the role he's playing on this team currently, but I'm not overly excited about him as a chalk play. Once again, I'm hoping we get more value on this slate. I'll probably be on field weight, but I don't foresee myself exceeding it. Unless as I dig deeper into the slate, it looks like I feel a little bit better about him exceeding 25 minutes, which is what we have him projected for. If it looks like I can see him seeing 30 plus minutes, I'll feel a little bit better about making him a core play. But for now, not overly excited about it. I'll just match the field, which means I'll have a crap ton tonight. But no one else really on the Spurs. Now, the Pistons. This is the game that could really shake up this slate. From an injury news standpoint, Jalen Duren is already out. And so with that being said, that's typically a boost for Isaiah Stewart and Marvin Bagley. We now have Marvin Bagley listed as questionable. Upper Slad, he's in the Discord all the time. He's one of the GOATs when it comes to figuring out injury news, getting that news out quick, having potential pivots off of that. One of the reasons to become a VIP member here at DFS Army is just so you can get some of that wisdom from him. He has been digging into the weeds a little bit and has shared that it looks like Marvin Bagley probably isn't going to play tonight. We would want to see what the starting lineup looks like, but that would be a nice boost for James Wiseman. But we got the news today that it looks like, who is it? Kevin Knox was wearing a starter jersey today in practice. So if Knox ends up starting, he would be really good value at 4K, and he's power forward and small forward eligible, which really opens things up a bit when you're making lineups tonight. So I would love Kevin Knox as a probably core play in that case, but also don't forget that Isaiah Stewart sees a good boost here too. So I would definitely increase my exposure to Stewart as well. So interesting spot for these Pistons. I don't love picking on the Cavs. You guys know that. Picking on the Cavs is never a fun thing to do because they are solid defense. But in this case, because these guys would be so cheap in the role they would be playing on this team, I'm fine with it. Asar Thompson has been awesome this season. Fine GPP target. Better play on FanDuel just because of the peripheral stats bonuses over there. Same with Cade Cunningham. Don't love this matchup for him, but obviously GPP viable. I don't foresee myself getting a ton of them tonight. Really looking at the front court here. All right. Next up, we have another team with a crap ton of questionable tags. Donovan Mitchell is currently listed as questionable, battling that hamstring issue he's had. Darius Garland, questionable neck. If one of Mitchell or Garland are out, we're playing a crap ton of the other. We've seen them perform well in these spots. Pistons, not a matchup that concerns me overly or a lot. If they're both out, we're playing whoever ends up starting for them. We're also prioritizing Max Strus and Karis LeVert, which is terrifying. That is not something that I say with a smile because they're both streaky. They are very streaky. But they would have an increase in minutes that would be solidified and their usage would increase. And so they would become much more viable plays for me on this slate and they wouldn't be expensive. So that's kind of why guys like Branham, I would want to have in my mix. Malachi Branham on the Spurs, I want to have in my mix today. But if we get some of this injury news, there's other guys in that same price range who could be just as good. So I don't want to go too crazy on any of these mid-range potential guys who are going to see an increased role tonight. So, interesting slate. Mobley was solid last time out. With Duren and potentially Bagley out, the matchup should be slightly easier for both him and Jared Allen. They're viable. I never get overly excited about paying for Mobley when he's 7,600. It's fine if he's in my mix, but I don't want to prioritize him. I'd rather prioritize Jared Allen here. But again, if we have a ton of value on the other side of it, granted, Knox is at the forward position, so you could play both Knox and Allen in the same line. But yeah, I like this spot for them. I like this game, and I'm hoping one of Mitchell or Garland are out. Honestly, ideally Mitchell, so I can really just play all the studs and starters for the Cavs. Next up, we have a game that's pretty boring. The Magic are relatively healthy at this point. Of course, Fultz is still out, but he's been out for a while, so everyone's kind of priced for it. Paolo Banchero, he's been in good form. We know he's good when Fultz is out. He takes on a little bit more of an aggressive role in the offense, and he's just more involved. Nice usage increase. He's getting ownership already. Again, he's another guy who I would expect to have some exposure to, but I also expect to be under the field on him, which I would be totally fine with. Ideally, he's showing up, so if he has a strong performance here, I have some exposure, but I don't want to make him a priority when we've already talked about some other forwards I like on this slate and other guys I like more on this slate. Franz Wagner, fine. Just not overly excited about him either. It looks like he's going to be even more chalky than Paolo. Again, fine if he's in the mix, but ideally we get that injury news so I can value other guys on this slate. These two, Paolo and Wagner, they make sense right now with the way the slate is shaping up. Without the injury news, you're probably going to need them to make lineups work. But ideally, we'll have some injury news, so we won't have to play as many of these mid-range guys who are in decent spots. Viable, but ideally, there'll be more GPP tournament plays, whereas right now, they would probably be cash viable without the injury news. So keep a close eye, per usual. For the Chicago Bulls, big news, DeMar DeRozan is questionable. So we need to wait for that. It's been interesting. There's a lot of trade talk going on with these guys. It wouldn't shock me. I know we all hate playing Zach LaVine at this point because he isn't always the best in these positions when he should have a stronger game performance. But I'm totally fine going right back to Zach LaVine here. Totally fine playing Vucevic. Mostly if DeRozan is out. We saw Patrick Williams come through in this spot last time. Fine going back to him. Alex Caruso's the guy I don't want to forget about like I did last time. He also sees a nice increase in usage. He's listed as probable today, so a bit easier to not forget about him if DeMar is out. So one of those situations. We got to keep a close eye on it today, y'all. We have an 11-game slate. They're not making it easy for us. For the Nuggets, no real injury news here. Jamal Murray's been out for enough time that doesn't really change too much. I do like the Nuggets tonight. Shocker, everyone's surprised. No, it's just that they're in a good spot. So Jokic is 12,500. I don't typically like to have to force Jokic in lineups when he's this expensive and not super low owned. But with that being said, ideally with the way the slate's shaping out, with him being 12,500, and ideally we get some of that injury news, it should be relatively easy for us to pay up to a guy like Jokic tonight. And he's been in fantastic form. He's been crushing it here lately. We have 100 rating on him for tonight, which does stand out a good bit. The Pelicans defense isn't bad by any means, but is not one I'm overly concerned about. And so, especially if this game is able to stay close, which we have a 5.5 point spread, so it should, I'm ideally going to be over the field on Jokic tonight. Next up, I like the other guys here too, MPJ and Aaron Gordon. I know Michael Porter Jr. hurt us earlier this week, but DFS, short-term memory, you can't get too sensitive about it. I still want to have exposure to him, ideally around field weight. I think Aaron Gordon could be like the sneakier. Well, no, not really sneakier, but he is a little bit cheaper with some decent upside as well. So I like having exposure to both MPJ and Aaron Gordon. But like I said, with the Magic guys, it will be a little bit harder to get to both if we get that Pistons value of Kevin Knox tonight. It would make a lot more sense just to kind of have him in there than Porter Jr. and Gordon. I do still want to make sure they're in my mix, even with Knox, if Knox ends up starting here and playing. But, don't want to go too crazy there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up for the Pelicans, CJ has been out for a while. We hit on Brandon Ingram earlier this week, I believe. That play went pretty well. The 8,400 price tag, don't love. Also, just them going up against the Nuggets, not my favorite thing. So I want to play Brandon Ingram and Zion, but just given their price tags, I believe I like other plays on the slate. Let me double check the sim and see if I'm missing anything here. Yeah, Brandon Ingram definitely has some upside, and Zion does too, but I prefer this sounds crazy, but I prefer the Clipper guys a good bit over Ingram and Zion tonight. So that's where I'm going to go. I understand them as plays, and that's really about it from the Pelicans tonight. The Suns, the team that will never be fully healthy, apparently. Beal has been battling that back injury, so he's listed as doubtful today. Devin Booker's listed as probable. I think the guy you want here is Kevin Durant at 9,700. He's not going to be a priority for me tonight, to be honest. But I do think if you're looking to play someone from the Suns, he's probably the only guy you want. Aaron Gordon at 4,800 is fine. Again, another one of those value plays that make more sense at the start of the day than I think it will by the time we get closer to lock. Hopefully we have that news. I don't know how many times I can say that, but hopefully we have that news. But yeah, I don't really like the Suns tonight, long story short. But again, we made the same point on Tuesday, I believe, with Halliburton. When you're looking at high total games, if you have studs who are going to be relatively low owned, viable GPP targets. So we'll continue to keep a close eye on the ownership and be prepared to talk about that on the pre-lock show. And for people interested in the pre-lock show, feel free to click the link in the description, promo code BOB for a 10% discount. You can definitely check out the pre-lock show, have access to the Discord, use the domination station for yourself, and go from there. For the Jazz, let's see. Is anyone missing? Not really. No new injuries to this team. I do like John Collins tonight. My only semi-concern with Collins is that he's getting some ownership, so he's not going to be sneaky, but I do like the spot. And then Colin Sexton's looking like a solid value guard. We saw him have a ceiling performance last time out. He was a domination station play. Earlier this week, I wasn't super high on him, but the domination station liked him, so I allowed myself to be downfield to him. If the situation is the same and we don't have more injury news that makes other value options look better, I think it's totally fine to go back to Sexton at 4,100 here. So not overly concerned about totally fine having exposure to him tonight. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Lakers against the Portland Trail Blazers. And guess what? We have a questionable tag. LeBron James is questionable tonight. I think you all know. I like AD. He is battling that hip injury. He's been looking a little rough here lately in that last game. But I am not overly concerned. If they're playing him, I'm assuming he's good to go. So with him probable and LeBron James questionable, I ideally would love to see LeBron James being out, but I'm going to be over the field to Anthony Davis. He's been so good this season, and we've had a lot of success utilizing him as a leverage play. I expect that to be the case once again tonight. And if we get the LeBron James news late, we're looking even better with Anthony Davis in. All right. And for the Portland Trail Blazers, I would say that with Malcolm Brogdon's out, if you didn't know that, that's probably the biggest thing here. Sharp is viable. Grant's fine. I think it's okay to have them in the mix. Mays is a viable 6,700 guard. I'll keep saying it. Ideally, we'll have better value. Ideally, we'll have better value. One trend that has started to show itself a good bit is that we can continue to play bigs against the Lakers. Ayton at 6,800 sees consistent minutes, and I appreciate that more than most things. He's been a decent point per minute guy this season. This is looking like a good spot for him at relatively low ownership. So I really like Ayton tonight as one of the probably like 5 to 10 bigs I like on this slate. So solid play for me. Last game, the hammer, the game everyone always asked about. The Rockets are relatively healthy at this point. The guys who have been out for a while. Şengün is fine at 7,700. If he's in the mix, that's cool, but I'm not trying to go out of my way to prioritize him. Fred VanVleet is a bit more interesting. Again, I think this is the Clippers are a team that I think we can pick on a little bit just because Harden's out there from a defensive standpoint. So getting exposure to him and or Jalen Green doesn't feel like a bad play to me by any means. Let me double check the sim and see if I'm thinking about highlighting any of these guys. Fred VanVleet is playable, but there's another point guard / shooting guard eligible player that we're going to talk about in the next game. I think I like more than him, which sounds wild. And let's see. Yeah, it's just Fred. Oh, I'm looking for Jalen Green, 6,600. Yeah, a little bit less interesting. So just one of those things. I think they're all fine, but there's other guys I like more. And a lot of those guys come from the Clippers. I haven't played a lot of Clippers this season. We did get the Paul George leverage play right on Tuesday, so glad he crushed then. But this is looking like a good spot for a lot of the guys on their team. For those of you that don't know, Russell Westbrook did officially apparently said, hey, I want to come off the bench. He thinks will be better for the starters. That, to me, sounds like Terrence Mann is going to start now instead of Westbrook. Terrence Mann has been a bit of a lower points per minute guy here recently, but we know he can definitely put up the points. At 3,800, he's looking like one of my favorite cheap guys on the slate. Even if we do get injury news, I want to make sure I don't forget about Terrence Mann because this is a good spot for him. So if he's only 4% owned, I'm fine being around 20%. If we get more injury news, I can be comfortable limiting that to around 10%, but I do like this spot for him. James Harden, we haven't played a lot this season. We all know James Harden is far from my favorite NBA player, especially when it comes to DFS. But with that being said, this is an interesting spot for him. I do want to see how the rotations play out and how this team looks without Westbrook starting. But at 7,600, James Harden's price tag has finally started to come down a little bit, where he's looking a little bit more playable. I am going to make sure I have exposure to James Harden tonight. If he's going to be 1.59% owned, I'm fine having around 5% of him and being over the field. My real decision comes down to Kawhi Leonard or Paul George. Last time around, we had some min exposures on both of them to make sure we were over the field, but Kawhi's getting a little bit more ownership tonight. So I'm leaning towards going over on Paul George, who I like just as much as Kawhi tonight. Although he is a bit more expensive, I am comfortable with the payoff of lower ownership with more upside potentially. The sim model likes them both as well. So ideally, I'll have exposure to all three of these guys, Paul George, Leonard, and Harden. And I only have to force exposure to force myself to go over the field on them. But yeah, y'all, that's the slate in a nutshell. It's a little bit of a crazy one, but I'm kind of liking it. So we'll see where we fall. We'll see where the injury news lands, but hopefully you all are there to check out the pre-lock show later today at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Again, Brandon, aka B-Dubs, will be here to help us all out on this slate too. But outside of that, I'll talk to you all later and see you on Monday.